Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting straight into a really core global concern, Iran's nuclear program. You know, you're here because you want to grasp the crucial stuff without wading through endless complex reports, and, well, that's exactly what we aim to do.
Yeah, absolutely. For this deep dive, we've really honed in on recent statements from Rafael Grossi, the head of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Right.
And we're looking at the latest on the diplomatic front, too, especially between the U.S. and Iran. Plus, we're drawing on some analysis from the Council on Foreign Relations.
The CFR report, yeah. Looking at their nuclear and, importantly, their missile capabilities.
Exactly.
Okay, so our mission, let's say, is pretty clear. Pull out the key insights. How close is Iran to a bomb? What's the world doing? Why does it all matter?
Let's do it. Starting with those quite stark warnings from the IAEA chief seems right.
Yeah, Grossi, he's definitely been raising alarms.
He has. He used this analogy like Iran has gathered all the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle for a nuclear weapon.
A jigsaw puzzle, meaning they have the components, the know-how.
That's the implication.
Yeah.
That they possess the necessary bits and pieces and the knowledge potentially to put them together.
And he didn't mince words in that Le Monde interview either.
No, he didn't. He stated pretty bluntly, Iran is not too far from having an atomic bomb.
Wow. That's about as direct as it gets from someone in his position. And he's planning a trip to Tehran, too.
Yes. To discuss these exact developments, it certainly signals, a high level of concern within the IAEA.
It has to, which ties into the actual enrichment levels, right? Because that's a big part of the puzzle pieces he mentioned.
Absolutely. And this is crucial. Iran's current enrichment level is way beyond what's needed for, say, civilian power.
Right. The reports say they're up to 60% purity.
60%.
And just to remind everyone, the 2015 deal, the JCPOA, that limited them to 3.67%.
Correct. A level considered perfectly adequate for their Bushehr power plant for energy production.
So going to 60%, that's a massive leap. It's not subtle. It dramatically cuts down the time needed to get to 90%, which is weapons grade.
It's a very short technical step from 60 to 90. That's the real worry.
And interestingly, the diplomatic talks, they aren't just about the enrichment numbers.
Well, not solely. You have Steve Witkoff, the U.S. Mideast envoy, really emphasizing verification.
Verification of what specifically?
Weaponization. So yes, the nuclear material, the enrichment, but also Iran's missile program and critically developing a trigger mechanism. You need all those for a functional weapon.
Okay, so the delivery system and the detonator, essentially.
Precisely. Which leads us naturally to the diplomacy itself. It's quite something that U.S.-Iran talks are even happening again.
Yeah, after that long pause since the U.S. left the 2015 deal back in 2018, the first round in Oman sounded surprisingly positive.
It did, didn't it? Yeah. Witkoff called them positive, constructive, and compelling.
High praise.
And even Iran's supreme leader apparently said they were going well, which is, well, unexpected maybe.
Definitely a shift in tone, potentially. But then Iran immediately talking to the Kremlin right after. What do you make of that?
It adds a layer, doesn't it? It just shows the complex geopolitical chessboard here. How does Russia fit into this? What are their interests? It complicates the U.S.-Iran dynamic.
For sure. And now there's talk of a second round, maybe in Rome, though Iran seems to prefer Oman.
Yep, the location itself seems to be a point of discussion. Makes you wonder what the strategic thinking is behind choosing Oman versus Rome.
And then you have the shadow of, well, potential future U.S. administrations. Former President Trump's stance is pretty clear.
Very clear. He's stated Iran must get rid of the concept of a nuclear weapon. Completely.
Not just limit it, but eliminate the idea.
Exactly. And any deal, he insists, has to be a Trump deal covering everything. Nuclear, missiles, triggers, the works.
Which is a much higher bar than the 2015 agreement. Speaking of which, maybe we should quickly recap the basics of that deal, since it's the backdrop to everything now.
Good idea. So at its core, the 2015 deal, the JCPOA, had Iran agree to significantly cut its uranium stockpile.
Okay.
And as we said, only enrich uranium up to that low 3.67% level.
And in return?
In return, they got access to billions in frozen assets, and major sanctions were lifted on oil, banking, other sectors.
But then Trump pulled the U.S. out in 2018. The main reason cited was concern over the deal not covering ballistic missiles, and that some nuclear restrictions had sunset clauses, meaning they'd expire.
Right. And that withdrawal really kicked off the current cycle, with Iran gradually exceeding the deal's limits and ramping up enrichment.
Which brings us back to the technical side. The IAEA is worried. Grossi used the puzzle analogy. How capable are they technically? What does the CFR analysis say?
Well, the general consensus among Western analysts, according to the CFR, is that Iran has the know-how. They have the infrastructure.
So if the political decision were made?
If the decision were made, they could likely produce a nuclear weapon relatively quickly.
How quickly is quickly? Because you hear different estimates.
That's where it gets interesting. Some analysts say maybe a few months to get the fissile material for one bomb.
Okay.
Others are more alarming, suggesting maybe just a week or two.
A week or two. That's incredibly fast. That's the breakout time we hear about. Just producing the core material.
Exactly. The breakout time, how fast they could get enough highly enriched uranium or plutonium. But, and this is important, actually weaponizing it.
Building the actual bomb, making it deliverable.
Right. That would likely take longer, though how much longer is also debated. But getting the fissile material is the crucial first step. And 60% enrichment makes that step much shorter.
And U.S. intelligence seems to align with those shorter timelines. There was that assessment from June 2024.
Yes, reportedly saying Iran can produce fissile material in 1 or 2 weeks. And then another report, February 2025, I think, suggesting a covert team might be looking at a faster, maybe cruder approach.
Faster and cruder. That doesn't sound reassuring. It really underlines the urgency.
It really does. And remember, this isn't happening in just one lab somewhere. Iran has multiple sites.
Natanz is the big enrichment facility, right?
That's the largest one, yes.
Yeah.
And the Bushehr power plant is their operational civilian reactor.
And the CFR report mentioned Parchin, too, that military complex. There were reports of a potential Israeli strike there in late 2024.
That's right. The suspicion around Parchin has always been about potential clandestine research, possibly weaponization work happening there in the past, or even currently. It just shows the tension, the suspicion in the region.
Definitely. And you can't talk nukes without talking missiles. How does Iran stack up there?
Well, according to the sources, they have the biggest ballistic missile arsenal in the Middle East. Plus cruise missiles, plus drones, a whole range.
And the range, how far can they reach?
Their longest range missiles are reported to go up to about 2,000 kilometers.
Okay, so that covers basically the entire Middle East, Israel, Saudi Arabia, U.S. bases, even parts of southeastern Europe.
That's the assessment, yes.
We saw some of this capability in action with the strikes on Israel in 2024.
We did. And the takeaway there was interesting. While defenses intercepted a lot, some missiles did get through.
So it wasn't a total failure for Iran despite the defenses?
Not entirely. And analysts warn that future strikes could be larger, maybe using more advanced missiles like the Fata-1 or Khaybar-Sheikhan that Iran has unveiled, which could be harder to stop.
Which logically ramps up the fear about what happens if they do get nuclear weapons. What are the biggest worries there?
The number one concern you hear from policymakers and analysts is major destabilization in the Middle East.
An existential threat to Israel, obviously.
That's paramount, given the history and rhetoric,
Okay.
but also the risk of miscalculation. A nuclear exchange in such a volatile region, it's terrifying.
And it wouldn't stop there, would it? The proliferation risk?
Exactly. The fear that other regional powers like Saudi Arabia might feel they have to get their own nuclear weapons to balance Iran.
There was that quote from Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi crown prince, back in 2023.
Right. He said something like, if they get one, we have to get one. For security, for balance. He added, they don't want to see it happen, but
But the implication is clear. A regional nuclear arms race.
it's a major concern. And beyond that, there's the worry that a nuclear-armed Iran might just feel bolder.
More aggressive foreign policy, closer ties with Russia, China.
Potentially. Feeling shielded by a nuclear deterrent might change their risk calculus.
The CFR analysis also made that point about changing the power dynamic, right? That a nuclear Iran could diminish U.S. and Israeli influence because, well, the U.S. has never attacked a nuclear state.
That's a stark strategic point. It suggests a nuclear weapon could fundamentally alter how conflicts are deterred or managed in the region.
So looking ahead at any potential deal, the starting positions seem miles apart.
They do. Our sources suggest the U.S. is aiming high, wanting Iran to completely dismantle its nuclear program.
Not just roll it back or limit it like in 2015, but get rid of it entirely.
That appears to be the goal.
But Iran's unlikely to agree to that.
Most analysts think that's highly improbable. Iran likely sees its program, especially now with its advancements, as critical leverage. Why give it up entirely?
So it's a really tough diplomatic challenge. Okay, as we wrap this up, let's crystallize the main takeaways.
I think the key things are, 1, Technically, Iran is very close. They have the knowledge, the materials nearing weapons grade, the infrastructure. Grossi's puzzle analogy captures it well.
Right. They're on the threshold, technically speaking.
2, this closeness has spurred intense international focus and renewed diplomatic efforts. But these talks are happening against a really complicated history and Iran's significant advancements.
The IAEA warnings are serious. The talks are critical. And 3,
the potential consequences if Iran does get a weapon are huge: regional stability, proliferation, global power dynamics. It affects everyone.
Absolutely. Which leads us to maybe a final thought for our listeners to ponder.
Yeah, thinking about everything we've discussed, the tech, the diplomacy, the history, the regional fears.
Yeah.
What do you see as the most likely path forward here?
What factors will be decisive? Is it the technical reality, the political will in Tehran or in Washington or elsewhere, the skill of the diplomats?
It's that complex interplay, something to definitely keep thinking about.